Hi everyone, so in this video we're going to be reviewing where conservatism is on society. So we're first going to be looking at where conservatives agree and disagree over pragmatic change and how society should change in a pragmatic fashion. And then we're going to be looking at how conservatives agree and disagree over the idea of tradition and whether traditions in society are important or not. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at how conservatives agree and disagree over the ideas of hierarchy in society and linked to that, ideas on authority. So first of all, we're going to be looking at the ideas of pragmatism. So first of all then, as you can see here, we've got two images. One on the left is of the French Revolution with its famous guillotine in use. And on the right there, you've got Lenin during the Russian Revolution. Now, conservatives believe that we need to conserve society. Conservatives are wary of change. Certainly, they would be wary of the changes that you see here. They prefer pragmatism because if you think about the ideological thinking that went behind the French Revolution, ideas of individual liberty, rights, they argue that they led to the dangerous outcomes of the French Revolution. And the socialist ideas behind the Russian Revolution were also ideological, and they also led to violent terror. So they attempt to adapt conservatism's core ideas over time as society gradually changes too. So arguably the most important people here to talk about are Edmund Burke and Michael Oakeshott. So Edmund Burke is a traditional conservative, and he talks at length about how we need to gradually change society. It's important that it does, but we need to change society so as to conserve it. Because he argues that if it can't change, well then eventually, as we saw with the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, chaos will eventually erupt and instability will erupt as well. Michael Oakeshott is another traditional conservative as well. He speaks at length about the importance of pragmatism, that pragmatism is flexible. It has all the benefits of being flexible as well. And it generally, by being pragmatic, it has the backing of most people. So pragmatists within conservatism, they reject these theories and these ideologies in favour of empiricism. Now, empiricism is another of Burke's ideas. It's this idea of practical experience being important. We should be flexible and decisions should be made on what works, not based on theories. So pretty much all conservatives believe that. Now, where they start to disagree is, as we've mentioned, traditional conservatives like Burke believe that we need to be pragmatic in order to protect the natural order of things, to conserve things. Now, there will be some inevitable change. They're not arguing that nothing should change, but this change should be embraced, and it will be embraced because a state, and this is a quote from Burke, a state without the means of some change is without the means of its conservation. So for a state, a government, a society to keep going, it would need to adapt to some extent. So Burke is very cautious. He's pragmatic. There will be some change, but it's going to be brought about peacefully through evolution. Wanting revolution or wanting some big change will often lead to conflict and chaos. So we need to remember that you've got these two events here in mind. Burke was writing about the French Revolution when he was advocating pragmatism. Now, compared to this, the New Right is far more radical. It does want to protect traditions, or at least its neo-conservative part, but it is also radical in some senses as well, particularly the neoliberal part of the New Right movement. So think about neoliberals like Ayn Rand, Robert Nozick. They are determined to abandon government intervention, particularly in the economy and in society. They really want to get the government out of people's lives. They believe that humans are rational creatures who should be able to decide how best to live their lives. So very much sharing those ideas of classical liberalism. They want people to be individuals. They want people to be able to decide their own lives. Okay. They want to also, thinking about the economy, they want to change that radically too. So remember people like leaders like Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, who introduced really radical ideas of privatization, getting rid of nationalized industries, rolling back the state, getting people off of that dependency culture on welfare payments as well. These were radical changes that happened to British society, and they were motivated not through pragmatic thinking, but through ideological ideas about what is right and what is wrong. So the next area for us to look at on society are the traditions within society. So when we talk about traditions, we need to think about some, well, we've got some here. How Parliament works. It's got all its interesting traditions there about how people need to vote in person. They walk down lobbies, for example. How you've got a House of Lords and a House of Commons. Moving to the right there, the top right, you've got an image of a traditional heterosexual marriage. That's a tradition that some conservatives want to protect. Looking at the bottom left-hand corner there, you've got your traditional nuclear family. A heterosexual couple with 2 kids. Okay, so very traditional idea about what marriage is. And lastly, thinking about our society again, thinking about the monarchy. That's a traditional tradition within our society too. Now, Edmund Burke argued that tradition is the accumulated wisdom of the past. So Parliament has been in existence for many years, as has traditional marriage, the traditional family, and the monarchy. And he argues that these sorts of things have evolved gradually over time. And these institutions, these customs from the past that we have inherited, have demonstrated their value to earlier societies. They're proven that they're fit for purpose because they have lasted. They've stood the test of time. They've managed to survive. And so we need to protect them, because Burke argues that they provide society with a strong sense of identity. He argues that what we identify with in society, what makes us British or Irish or German, are our traditions. It's what binds us together. It's what keeps society ordered and stable. So, thinking about where there's areas of disagreement then, traditional conservatives and One Nation conservatives as well, in fairness, And you could also argue neoconservatives within the New Right argue that traditions are really important. They establish continuity from one generation to the next and stability too. They keep society ordered and stable. Now, traditional conservatives like Burke argued that society, and this is a quote from him, is a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are yet to be born. So each generation has a duty to protect these traditions and pass them on to the next generation because they are the accumulated wisdom of the past. Now, going back to the idea of neoconservatives like Margaret Thatcher, for example, they reject permissiveness, a permissive culture. For her in particular, it was these permissive values of the 1960s. Now, these permissive values of the 1960s this is basically the idea that people could make their own moral choices about who they were with, how they would live their lives, for example, what was right, what was wrong. Now, neoconservatives like Margaret Thatcher are what we call anti-permissive. They are concerned that this will damage public morality. They argue that by allowing humans to decide what is right and what is wrong, that will start a free-for-all. Anything will be allowed. And so really, they are very much concerned with the breakdown of your traditional nuclear family, a breakdown of traditional marriage, maybe a breakdown in the respect of traditional institutions like Parliament and the monarchy, and that would lead to social breakdown as well, disorder, crime, because people don't value their society any longer. So under Margaret Thatcher, for example, you might remember that while she was Prime Minister and the Conservatives were in power in the late 70s, 80s, early 90s, they introduced all sorts of legislation that, famously thinking about Section 28, for example, was discouraging people from talking about encouraging homosexuality in lessons in schools, or promoting it at least. That's an example of wanting to protect heterosexual marriage. The introduction of regulations on who can buy or rent films. A concern about what they called video nasties, concerns about people watching certain films that could encourage people to challenge values, for example. Introducing tough measures that might lead to longer prison sentences because there's this belief that prison works. So they want to protect society. Right. Before we move on, it's also worth mentioning that the liberal New Right, or what we call neoliberals within the New Right, of which Margaret Thatcher would be a part as well, they are sort of at odds with the neoconservative wing within the New Right. They argue that, yes, humans are selfish, but people like Ayn Rand, people like Robert Nozick say that actually this is a good thing because humans are rational. Humans should be allowed to be individuals and should be allowed to pursue their own dreams and interests, reach their own goals in their own way. And so long as they realise other people want to do the same and they respect that, then that should be encouraged. We shouldn't try to cling to traditions of the past just because there's this belief that it's the accumulated wisdom of the past. That gets in the way of people being who they want to be. So they are very much in the belief that people should be individuals. They believe in individualism, that classical liberal idea. They believe that by people being allowed to be individuals, humans can reach their potential And eventually there will be that natural respect, because everybody realizes that everybody is, yes, selfish, but they are selfish in the sense that they're all trying to achieve their goals and be the best possible individual, best possible them. So the last bit to look at then is what conservatives think about hierarchy in society. So you've got this image here. Okay, so a good example of a hierarchical society is the feudal society. So you've got the king at the top. Now you might remember that in a feudal society there's this belief that the king is put there by God, or the queen is put there by God, the divine right of kings. Now below them are the lords, the landowners, maybe members of the clergy as well. Now they are loyal to the king, as you can see. They provide military aid to the king as well when required. And by military aid I mean money, and I also mean the soldiers that live on their land. And in return the king gives them land, gives them peasants, and that's why they are loyal to the king. The next row down are the knights. These are the people who are not just loyal to the king, but they're loyal to the lords, the landowners that they of the area that they live in as well. So they pay homage to the landowners. So when war comes, they promise that they will fight. They provide their military service, and in return the landowners give them food, protection and shelter. Below them, the lowest rung of society in a feudal society is our peasants or serfs, people who are usually tied to the land. They farm the land, they pay rent, and in return the king, the lords and the knights below them provide food, protection and shelter to the peasants. Now the reason why I mention this is because traditionally conservatives believe that this hierarchical society is basically decided by God. And so conservatives argue that society is naturally hierarchical. It's fixed. You've got these social ranks here and they are fixed. So there is inequality. Of course, the king has more power than anybody else. The lords have the land, more land than other people. The knights, they have certainly more pay and food and benefits than the peasants. So that you've got this unequal society, and it is fixed. It's very difficult for there to be some sort of social mobility here, if indeed it exists at all. People can't really move up or go down. And this is very much what traditional conservatives favour. Now, traditional conservatives say that this is natural. They argue that individuals vary in terms of their talents, their intellect, their skills, their work rate. And they argue that this is organic. This is part of the organic society. This is part of this idea that society has evolved over time. It's a bit like a living organism. So we need, they argue, this inequality, because we need these different classes and groups. They're a bit like a living organism. So just like a human body has different limbs and different organs, and they all perform different tasks. The heart performs its own task. The liver performs its own task. Different groups within society perform their own task too. So the king performs a task, lords perform a task, knights perform a task, peasants perform a task too. Everybody knows their role in society. Everybody accepts it because, yes, they have to be loyal to the rung above, but they don't have the same responsibilities as the people above as well. So to think about it in more recent times, think about the three classes that we talk about today. The upper class have the most land and wealth and power, but they also have the most responsibility. They're meant to be the ones who rule. The middle class have less responsibility, less money, less land, but they have less responsibility too. They are responsible for generating wealth. These people are the shop owners, the factory owners. They generate wealth. Okay, so they're responsible for creating jobs, generating wealth. And then the working class are the people who are basically making products. They are making things to be sold. So they have some responsibility in that sense, but they don't have the same responsibilities as a business owner, a landowner, or the ruling class, the upper class. Everybody knows their role. Everybody gets something out of it. And that, they believe, is a hierarchical society. Now, where conservatives disagree then is, well, traditional conservatives and to some extent One Nation conservatives argue that the most advantaged also have the heaviest social responsibilities. So as we mentioned before, the middle class, like managers, employers, yes, they've got more money, they've got more land, they've got more property than, say, the working class, but they've got a burden. They need to keep jobs going. They need to make sure that their workforce is looked after too. So this hierarchical society that's come about organically, naturally, sort of also encourages paternalism too. This idea that people higher up in society have a role to be like a father figure to those beneath them. And that makes sure that there is social cohesion. So remember, One Nation conservatives like Benjamin Disraeli argued that it's very important for the upper class to act in a paternal way to look after the working class. And that's why under his leadership, changes were made to housing, changes were made to the working hours as well. Otherwise, he argued, it would descend into disorder. Unless they looked after the poorest in society and improved their conditions, then Britain would divide into two nations, a rich nation and a poor nation. And this would increase the likelihood of social revolution. The privileged had this duty to look after the less fortunate. Now, to disagree here, it's worth arguing that neoliberals argue that humans should have maximum freedom, particularly libertarians. And so this sort of idea of paternalism, where people above you know better than you, need to look after you, doesn't really fit in with that, because they're taking away your freedom. Certainly they argue that, neoliberals in particular like Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick, argue that there should be this meritocratic society. People should be able to be socially mobile. They should be able to move up society if they're hard workers. They should be able to benefit from the fruits of their labour. You might remember the idea of Robert Nozick's side constraints, that people should have freedom. They should have the rights to their own property. If people are taking away rent, or people are taking away taxes from you in the belief that then who you're giving those taxes to can look after you, then really they're violating your freedom. They're violating your rights as well. So hopefully this video has helped you to understand where the major areas of agreement and disagreement are within conservatism. Do let me know if you have any further questions.